Hello everybody, I'm back with another video for you today, and I wanted to give my thoughts on some of the better cards in the expansion that are coming from a little bit of theory crafting, from thinking about the points they can generate, the provisions they cost, all that kind of stuff. So I do have 10 cards that I want to talk about. I'll be talking about them in order from best to worst out of the top 10, and they're all faction specific, no neutrals. They are all gold cards, just because they feel like the more impactful plays. But of course there will be a lot of bronzes that are kind of auto-include in decks, for sure. Not going to talk about those, just the really powerful, sort of very strong golds that are going to be, there for each faction, and which of those are better for each faction and whatnot. So let's jump into it. The first and best card, in my opinion, is Dettlaff Higher Vampire. This is a monster card, and it has insane potential. 10 provisions for 5 strength. You guys know what this does, hopefully. It's effectively Ruin, but costs less, more starting points, and you can eat it multiple times on the same turn because it summons back to your row immediately instead of having to wait till the next turn. So pretty much you can get 20 points with this quite easily with things like Peyran, synergizing very nicely with it, things like Cyclops, Babagazi. There's a lot of potential here for this card to be absolutely insane as a monster finisher, or just as playing it in sort of a 3-4 card round with maybe Cyclops, Babagazi, Slizzard, whatever. Just amazing amount of value possible from this. 20 for 10 is just mind-blowingly good, and it's very hard to remove because 5 strength avoids lots of death blow effects that banish units that we've now got with the expansion. The only real thing that can deal with this is Lock. Destroying it will just make him come back, of course. So very, very powerful card. I do expect this to be a very strong finisher, and not even a finisher in monster decks when the expansion drops. Also got synergy with Crimson Curse, the card which, is also worth considering, and a vampire for things like Orianna and whatnot. So, next up we have Treant Boar. I didn't actually talk about this card in any of the card reveal videos I've done, but it is an 8 provision card for Scoia'tael, 5 strength. Has a really awesome effect where it basically moves between the melee and the ranged row every turn if you use the order ability, and when it moves to the range you can damage an enemy unit by 2. And if you move to the melee, you can heal it. So it's kind of like Botchling for Scoia'tael, and Botchling is one of the best cards in the game, if not, yeah, it might even be the best, to be quite honest. Very, very powerful card for Northern Realms. This is basically the Botchling for Scoia'tael, so obviously it's going to be very, very powerful. It's maybe not quite as good, but it definitely has more possibilities for it, with things like movement synergy, Dolbathana Sentry, Dragoons, whatnot. You can maybe get some value, extra value on what this should be, which is basically 1 point a turn and healing itself every turn. But you also have targeted removal with this. You can set up death blow effects, you can damage engines, you can destroy enemy units. Really incredible card. I think this one will be pretty much an auto-include in Scoia'tael, and a very, very powerful engine. Alright, next up we have Sigvald, who's here. Now this is effectively the Botchling for Skellige, is how I'm going to look at it. Another one of these 8 provision engines, 6 strength this one. Again, very hard to remove. The thing with the Treant Boar is if they damage it, of course, it can heal itself, so it's, again, only really vulnerable to lock. And that's kind of a similar theme with a lot of these guys. They're only really vulnerable to locks, and guess what? Locks aren't going to be as strong with the coming patch because Purification is going to be a mechanic that you can use to unlock these engines and get them back into the battle effectively. So I'm kind of valuing these very highly for that reason, but also just because they seem to be getting a lot of points most of the time. Sigvald, 1 damage every turn, doesn't take long at all for you to reap the reward on the 8 provision cost. And of course if you trigger the Berserk, or if your opponent damages him in an attempt to remove him, he can start pinging for 2 and just going crazy. So I think this one will be very, very annoying for people to deal with. He of course sets up Bloodthirst as well if you're playing Bloodthirst cards. Got synergy with Self-Wound, Bloodthirst, and just generally a very powerful engine that you can probably use to your advantage in Skellige. Okay, next up we have Prince Anséis, and this guy is very, very powerful as well. 10 provision card for Northern Realms, of course. Gonna synergize massively with things like Meve, potentially with Calanth as well, even. And basically just a better Selkirk a lot of the time. You of course can get Zeal on his ability, do 4 damage or duel if he's boosted from Meve or from effects you have on the board. You can even give him a shield if you have shield givers on the board to effectively double the damage that he does with that duel effect. He's a lot safer than Selkirk, cannot be moved around and whatnot, and even if he gets damaged, he doesn't have to duel, he can then do 4 damage, so he's just all around a much safer and stronger Selkirk, with a ton of synergy in Northern Realms. I imagine this card would be very, very common in Northern Realms decks, especially if you're playing Meve, and especially if you're playing sort of removal-based decks or engine-based decks, which often Meve is trying to do. Okay, next up we have Milton. The only Nilfgaard card on here. I think Nilfgaard doesn't have the best gold cards, to be honest, compared to some of the other factions, but Milton is definitely one of them that can you know, fight against the rest. So he has 8 provisions, 5 strength, and of course the potential to get up to 10 damage, to 10 strength as a card if you're able to either trigger his death blow effect or if you have Palmerin in hand. 10 for 8 is just wildly, like, very, very good. Very above rate for the provision cost. And you don't even necessarily have to play Palmerin with him if you are able to set up the death blow with things like spies or other damaging effects. All around, just a very solid tempo play and a bit of removal attached to it as well. I think this card will be very good and pretty much an auto-include for Nilfgaard. Okay, up next we have Orianna and Queen of the Night. I kind of put these two together because if one of them is good, the other will probably also be good because they're both synergizing together, you know, with the bleeding effect and the vampire effect and whatnot. And you've got the extra utility of Purification, which for 3 provisions, this is an 8 provision card, Queen of the Night, so, you know, you're not paying too much for that Purification, which is obviously going to be a very powerful effect, unlocking units, cleansing, bleed, vitality, etc. So you're also then having that flexibility to give bleeding to a unit, which is going to synergize with Orianna, which I think is the true, I guess, top number 6 best card here. She seems very good. If you're playing vampires, if you're playing bleed, then you're going to be able to get an incredible engine which will boost a ton every turn, get you a deploy effect in addition to that, and just all around get you a ton of value, potentially even be game breaking if you can give this immunity in some way. And yeah, just working really well together. The reason these are together is because I don't know if they'll actually be played a lot. Maybe you don't want to play vampires in your monster deck and thriving and big units is better or something. If that's the case, then these maybe won't see play, but if one of them is, then probably the other will be, and I can see them both being very, very strong for monsters. Okay, next up we have Sirssa, and this is the card I revealed back in the day. It seems like a while ago now, it's been almost a month. Anyway, 8 provision card for Squirtle, very, very powerful, just all-around good card, basically having a base of 8 points with 2 damage and 2 carryover, which is obviously very good. Plus you have that Harmony tag, so you probably would throw this in any deck that's playing sort of Sheldon and hand buff. Why not chuck it in there? You can play it in a Dryad deck where you're harmonizing and getting all the Dryads on the board and whatnot. I just see this card having a place in a ton of Squirtle decks. It's very good. Pretty much a minimum 8 for 8 with a potential of going 10 for 8, 11 for 8 potentially. If you've got Sheldon, if you've got Harmony Synergy in your deck going on. Very good card, I think. A little bit unassuming. It doesn't seem like the strongest, but it's definitely going to put in the work and get you a lot of points if you're playing Squirtle. Okay, next up we have Katakan. This is another monster card. I'm not exactly sure if I'm overrating this, but it seems to be pretty good. It's just basically Arcspore, but also with Vampire Synergy. The Thrive effect is harder to proc than with Arcspore, of course, but you're pretty much already getting the values as a 9 provision card, so you need to either thrive with it a little bit and get that deploy effect of an Ekamara spawning, or kill it with Death Wish and make sure you get all those vampires out, get the 10 for 9, 11 for 9. I see us pretty easily reaching the 9 for 9 value and going beyond that, as well as having Vampire Synergy, Thrive Synergy, with things like Griffins, Ice Giants, whatever. And just all around pretty good with Crimson Curse as well, pretty good as a standalone, hard to remove or deal with for the opponent as well. Just all around a pretty strong card that I think will be played quite a bit in monsters. Okay, next up we have Sigvald Blood Totem. For Skellige, it's a 10 provision unit, or artifact, sorry. And it spawns the Fanatics. You can then damage the Fanatics and proc them, turn them into bear abominations. This card seems really good. It's effectively a 10 for 10 minimum most of the time, which is very, very powerful. Of course, and it's got a bit of added self-wound synergy. If you want to maybe damage a different type of unit to the Fanatic, you can do that. If you have cards that synergize with your guys being damaged, or you having damaged units, then this could also maybe be quite good for you. Basically just a 10 for 10 with an upside potentially. Seems like it will be pretty good in Skellige. And the final card we have is Queen Adalia. Probably the weakest of these cards from what I'm anticipating. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be good. And it probably will be broken in some way at some point in gimmicky decks with the Centurion Royal Guard or other cards. You know, even just using this on Revenant is pretty damn powerful, or Blue Stripes Scout, Blue Stripes Commando, whatever you want to do. Seems like a very good card. Gonna be able to get that 11 points for the 11 provisions a lot of the time, maybe even more if you're able to abuse some kind of combo with it, which I'm sure people will discover. If you're able to shield up an engine that is of high importance, like a Revenant or something, then you're going to be good to go. I think this card will see quite a bit of play in Northern Realms, although I'm not sure it's as strong as the other cards on here, which are probably just all pretty much close to auto-include in a lot of decks or archetypes that they'll be present in. So yeah, those are my top 10 Crimson Curse cards. I think all of these cards will be very good, maybe even some of them will be nerfed. Looking at you, Dettlaff, maybe. I don't know, Dettlaff might be a little bit too strong, but I want to see how that pans out. It will be very, very interesting to check out the meta. I'm going to be making a lot of decks come the expansion tomorrow. I hope you'll, tune in and watch the YouTube videos, watch my Twitch as well if you feel like it. Anyway, do feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys tomorrow for the expansion.